G'day everyone and welcome back to Trendz. I'm your host, PommyInOz, and we're here on the Inner Sanctum. If you are enjoying our content, please make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe and turn that notification bell on. That's a push notification and that'll let you know when we upload with all your hard-hitting, sporting videos and discussion points. So welcome to the show. And today what we're doing is something a little bit different, and it's probably been much talked about in the AFL fraternity as a whole, and that is the dream combination of Brodie Grundy and Max Gawn joining forces at Melbourne Demons Football Club. And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we've had a lot of the dream pairings in the world of sport, particularly in the engine room, if you will. If you are a round ball fan, you will have remembered the difficulty of fitting Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard in the same midfield. And it is one of them things where very similar players playing in the same position, how will it work? And obviously, we're all guilty of pairing these two together if you have played any form of fantasy football. So it is a really exciting thing. So let's look at these two individuals we're going to talk about today. And the first is the captain of Melbourne Football Club, probably been the best ruckman for a good part of most of this decade almost. And the name that rolls off the tongue, Max Gawn. And he played 22 games last year. He's just turned 31, obviously a ruckman. And he's got a Trendz ranking for last year as the #1 ruckman. And the reason is when you look at Max as a footballer and as a ruckman, top 5 for hitouts per game, top 5 for total hitouts, top 2 contested marks. It's his work rate around the ground. It's not just the fact he averages 27 hitouts a game. It's the fact he works around the ground. And let's look at the role he plays. Particularly in their defensive sets. We saw very successfully in their flag year and last year, probably less so because he didn't do it so much, was him almost floating back after taps and becoming the extra man in defense. And he oscillated just outside of D50. And he became kind of like a magnet. I know there was a few games I watched, particularly when Carlton played them, where he almost like the ball gravitates towards him. He has an uncanny knack of taking them marks. So that is probably his major strength, his work rate around the ground. So I found it really interesting when you paired it with a guy that I think, in my opinion, a lot of the press have been saying, will it work? Of someone who complements it, and that is Brodie Grundy. We look at him, only the 6 games last year because of the injuries, 28 years old, 11th though last year from his output. A lot has been talked about with Brodie Grundy that he needed to add something offensively. Now, we know that he's a primary ball getter. He's very good at getting, I would say his plus marks are probably a little bit different to Max Gawn, particularly in the way that he works around the ruck and around stoppages and almost becomes an extra bulky midfielder. It's going to be interesting how injuries affect him, but there was a lot of talk last year, and I thought there was merit. And you see what Colin would have done with Darcy Cameron, of almost converting him into like a pseudo forward, if you will. And that was very interesting this week because they played Richmond. And let's have a look at them. Let's have a look at how they went on. This was Max Gawn's game. 17 touches, 8 marks, 3 inside 50, 2 marks, 3 goals, 2, and 11 score involvements. Now, we saw a real increase in Max Gawn's time behind the ball, playing that defensive stopper role. It's almost like the AFL's equivalent, probably of Franco Baresi, as the sweeper. And it was an impressive performance, I thought, by Max, if not quietly understated. And what we've got to look at is what did Melbourne do incredibly well versus the Demons. And surprisingly, one of the big things was their intercept game just died. Their transition game just died. And the big thing was their forward half transitions. They couldn't really get the ability to clear, to get them tackles and to turn the ball inside 50 because he was always there. And a big thing with Max Gawn that people don't really talk about is it isn't just them intercept marks. It's the fact that he spoils, the fact that he has to take an attacker away from that play. Because if you leave him open, he's going to ping them all day. And you found the structure of Richmond definitely gravitated towards him, particularly in their final third, that as he was there, they had to handle a very good backline in itself. Stephen May was there, and you saw Stephen May's numbers increase because it created the avenues there for him to work in and take them intercepts. And we talk about a lot of how Melbourne work. With that Petty, Lever, May, one of them is kind of the stay at home, allowing the other two to work off him and peel off their man. Having Max Gawn there adds another element to take it all out, which then allows these intercepts to come from around the ground. And what's interesting enough is when we get onto this fella, Brodie Grundy. He had 10 marks, 3 marks, 2 marks inside 50. No intercept marks because he played more forward. 3 goals, 0, and 5 intercepts. And already when we look at these two ruckmen, they have impacted a lot. That's 6 goals, 3 between them, 6 contested marks, 17 contested possessions. Do you know what I mean? And they were the huge takeaway in that first half from Melbourne of just how strong that is. Now, what Brodie Grundy does is kind of the opposite. We talked about Richmond's intercept game. It's their number one thing. It's how they've won multiple flags. It's their strength. When Brodie Grundy went forward, we saw Spargo and McDonald suddenly have a lot more freedom because where teams genuinely double up on these players, you couldn't do when Brodie was resting there. And it was interesting because when these guys were in the ruck, although they weren't dominant in the ruck, hit-outs are probably one of the more overrated stats because people choose to forget teams like Richmond, one flag shark in the opposition. Geelong aren't exceptionally strong in that area. However, they have a very good setup. And this destroyed Richmond's back half setup too because suddenly Brodie allowed Spargo to run in off him, take the easy marks. And when they will both oscillate in either end of the ground, you suddenly saw a major change. Now, am I saying this is impossible to beat? No, I'm not. But I thought we saw a very ominous sign for AFL coaches in 2023 that if these two stay fit, that is going to be incredibly strong. One of the big negatives from it is we did see that it took a while for them to kind of get a rhythm. I do find Max Gawn and Brodie Grundy a very rhythmical ruckman. And it's kind of like watching an old gangly fast bowler, in the 90s coming in. And it's about getting that rhythm. Brett Lee would probably sum that. Once he found his rhythm, he was hard to beat. And it feels like that's going to be probably the big thing for Goodwin to work out. How much ruck time is enough? How because they do ruck very differently and how that looks with his midfield. But when you've got Viney, you've got Oliver, these two players are very good at whether they win taps or not at extracting the pill. But I thought it was very interesting because we are going to see, I think, these pillars. And in my opinion, Max Gawn is superior when he's working in that back half of the ground. And I like this Brodie Grundy playing forward. I think that could be his role. And I do think ultimately Collingwood may look at this and think they've missed a trick because when we look at what Collingwood need, they've gone Max McStay, who I think does straighten them out and definitely works hard up the ground. I do think, though, he's kind of almost an undersized key to go with Myercheck, and that big height does cause a factor. As we've seen in the AFL, height, you don't get shorter as the quarters go. But it was a real terrific start, and even though we've had a small catchment, we've seen that these two are really playing polar opposite parts of the ground and causing stretching. And it's going to be interesting, particularly for these teams that rely, like Carlton, rely heavily on their forward half turnover. Teams like Geelong, Sydney, who look for that intercept game and look to hurt you off the back half. Richmond, it has done. How that looks structurally, because suddenly you're not going to be able to commit players to be that conduit in the forward 50 because Max Gawn's there. You're going to struggle to have a player loose, play him total intercept when Brodie Grundy rests there. It's a very interesting thing, and it's a very good problem for Goodwin to have because if he gets this right, I think Melbourne are going to be very hard to beat. If you're a Demons fan, are you excited about it? Are you looking forward to seeing fantasy become reality? And if you're an opposition fan, tell me how you think you're going to stop them. Are you worried, or what are you hoping to see? And what do you think can negate it? I'll be back next week with the trends in AFL. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of the content on Inner Sanctum, and see you next time.